Welcome to the Needham Say More podcast. This is season 4, episode 2. I'm Aaron Pressman.
And I am Doug Fox. Thanks so much for joining us.
The topic today is going to be about affordable housing. There's a big plan coming up before the town to consider that could really increase the stock of affordable housing. And that's what we're going to discuss today.
And it feels like an appropriate subject on the eve of Thanksgiving coming up on the holidays, where I think we can all be thankful for what we have and maybe think of maybe some people that maybe may have less and opportunity for us as a town to do a little more.
And now, obviously in the region, in Massachusetts, in the area, there's a crisis of affordable housing, both as we mean that sort of in a generic way, like even for people in fairly high paying jobs, it's hard to find a house they can afford. But we're more focused on a plan in Needham for affordable housing under the law, which is when you're talking about people with 50%, 30%, very low income relative to the average income in the region.
I think they use the term deeply affordable, right?
Right.
For the
For
units we're
30%
talking
of the
about. Yeah,
deeply
which some of them are Section 8, some of them are seniors. Um, in Needham Housing Authority, no tenant, for example, pays more than 30% of their annual income in rent. Like there's a ceiling on that, and many, way below that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, maybe one way to look at the Needham has its own housing authority, which oversees about, I think, 330, 340 units of this very affordable housing. Some of it was built with state money, some of it was built with federal money. A lot of it is like more than 70 years old, a lot of it is more than 50 years old. It really is in need of both maintenance and also probably some expansion.
yeah, and it kind of falls into a strange place, right? Because it was funded a lot federally and state, and the federal funding really dried up. And from a town perspective, the town technically isn't in charge of it. It has its own sort of governance, which is three commissioners that we elect as a town. One who is just outside chosen by the governor, and one who's a resident, which is, I think, select board does play a role in that. It is people that are nominated by residents, but then the select board do appoint someone. But the town, in many ways, the town government doesn't, they don't have as much governance over it as they do of other areas in town.
I think that's fair to say. So, also, in the big picture of Needham affordable housing, there's the state's 40B law, which is an encouragement or an incentive for towns to have at least 10% of the housing stock as the sort of legal affordable housing. And Needham has met that threshold. I think the most recent number I saw was Needham is over 12% of all the units count as affordable. But the tricky thing there is that if you build a rental building with rental units and at least 20 to 25% are affordable, then all of the units in the whole building, including that 75% that are not affordable, get counted in our stat. So when we say that 12% of Needham's housing is affordable units, actually, in reality, it's about half that number. It's a little over 700 that are actually affordable. And of that 750 or so, about half of those, I think, what did I say, 336, I think, something like that, are,
45% was the number that I saw of
yeah,
they refer to as subsidized housing inventory.
those are run by the Needham Housing Authority, and that's kind of what's in play in this plan that we're going to discuss today.
And it's broken up into kind of three main areas in town. Over near High Rock School, there's something called Linden. The Linden complex is a bunch of kind of senior one-story bungalows. Um, there are a couple of apartment buildings that are the Chambers apartments out behind those. And then as you head up Linden Street, they have things that are called High Rock Estates, which are these small kind of ranch homes. And then they have the High Rock Homes, which are larger homes with two units in them. I think one is a rental and one is an affordable condo or some sort of townhouse setup. Additionally, there are residences on the other side of town at Captain's Cook Bridge, and Seabeds Way. And then there's a house for apartment with residents with disabilities called the Matthews House on Great Plain Ave, not far from Central.
Yeah, so a lot of those units you were just talking about, Linden and Chambers and High Rock, those are right by the High Rock School. And if you're driving down the street there, as you pass the school on one side, a lot of the units are on the other side. And then the street kind of curves up the hill, and that's where some of those two-family houses are.
Yeah. And my mother-in-law lived in one of the Linden bungalows for a couple of years. We were very happy to get her in there. She had congenital heart failure. We moved up here for healthcare, and she lived with us for a little bit and had a hard time with stairs. And we had a bit of a wait, but not as long of a wait as we thought we might have had. And that was a nice setup there, walking distance to town. The nice park across where she could see kids playing soccer in little league and whatnot. So it is a nice complex to have, for residents and for people to be able to live in.
One of the things the housing authority has said about why they need to expand is now there's a multi-year wait to get into any of the housing, and also a lot of the units are in need of a lot of maintenance or maybe are beyond repair. And then the third thing is they're not particularly energy efficient and sustainable as we think of them in the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that the bungalows they're in rough shape, on Linden, and I mean I'll even tell you the Bridge Seabeds Way ones, like I felt those felt a little dated in the '80s, and now are definitely way past their time. So in 2021, the Needham Housing Authority launched something called the PRI. Get ready, there's a lot of acronyms in what we're talking about here today. The Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative, which was a plan over the next 10 years, um, to leverage local CPA funds, in order to get an additional 10 times, what Needham spends in funding from federal and state sources, basically looking to replace or modernize, all 330 or the majority 336 of the existing Needham Housing Authority units, and also to add, for the first time in a long time, to add to our stock over the next 10 years. And the goal is there's going to be more of them, but also that this will kind of set up the affordable housing, the Needham Housing Authority, to last the next another 40 years, going forward. But it's very complex applying for these federal and state grants. So we engage another housing authority, the Cambridge Housing Authority, as our development consultant, to work with us through this process, because they are very skilled and having navigated it many, many times.
And I think so. The plan that's like straight ahead of town meeting and others, in part, we'll talk about what parts, but in the next 5 years, the idea is that two of these areas, the Linden bungalows and the Seabeds units, could be modernized slash replaced slash expanded. Each project is a little different. For Linden, where we have 72 bungalows now, the idea, and we'll link to the project, but they want to build a much more traditional sort of like 4-story apartment building in place of where all those bungalows are. And I think aesthetically, it's a big change. And even I think the living experience of being a person who lives in a bungalow versus a person who lives in a big giant apartment building is different. And I'll just say that basically for local funding, for Needham would need to come up with about $7 million, and then we would find grants for over $60 million to finish that project. That could be done in the next 5 years. And then the other piece in Seabeds is just to modernize the 76 units that are there. Needham would put up $1 million, and then we'd need about another 40 plus $1 million to complete that project. So within 5 years, the idea would be that what's now about 148 units that are in decline would actually be over 200 units that would be very modern and energy efficient.
And for the ones on Linden, you're definitely right. I mean, the residents, they're we're kind of getting some mystery action from the Linden residents, but they are getting larger units. Like their current units are around 400 square feet, and the newer units are going to be around 550 square feet, some even larger. They're getting, elevators, right, which is important. These are seniors and disabled housing. Um, so to have them be more accessible, they're going to have central air and heating. There's been a lot of problems with mold and air quality, so better environmental air quality. There's going to be more overall outdoor space around the building, albeit they've been used to being able to step out right outside their front door, into the outside, which is a big difference. Um,
Another piece of that that's coming up right before town meeting very soon next year is the current zoning does not provide for a four-story apartment building in that part of town. So town meeting I guess in the spring is basically going to be considering a huge overhaul of the zoning for that area that would allow for these four-story apartment buildings. And I assume we'll hear both from maybe some of the current residents of affordable housing, and also maybe some current residents of the neighborhood who may
Yes.
not want as big a building. There was a few years ago, there was I think 5 or 6 story building proposed for over on Chestnut Street, kind of backing up to Linden, where the Hartney Graymont tree company is. And that was defeated in town meeting. People thought that was too tall, too big, didn't out of characteristic with the neighborhood.
And for the Maple Street residents, this has to be really deja vu because the Hartney Graymont was on one side of them, and now, I mean, if you look at the diagrams, they're used to having, they have some small woods between them and the back of this complex, but it's all bungalows, and it's a pretty dramatic difference, even though there's going to be, a good amount of space between this building and the road, and between this building and Maple Street. It's a dramatic difference if you're looking out your backyard on Maple Street versus what it looks like currently. And you're totally right. Like the people that live on Linden or Sylvan Road or any of those places that are coming down Linden, this will have an impact also. I mean, there's a visual impact. I don't think, when I think of seniors and disabled, I don't think it's a lot of rush hour traffic coming in and out of there. I'm sure they'll do a traffic study, but there still will be, additional traffic coming out of there. So
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the traffic would really be serious, but I think it is fair to say that it would be very different from the characteristic of the neighborhood. And I think in a way this project, which is going to come right before town meeting soon, epitomizes kind of the whole way that the state and the town are trying to address affordable housing, both legal affordable housing and the larger question of affordable housing, just even for higher salary people, which is more dense development. And more dense development means taller buildings, multi-unit apartment buildings. And the MBTA Communities Act, which we've talked about before, is going to allow that kind of development in many parts of town once that's completed also. So this debate is almost like a preview of what we're going to be experiencing maybe over the next 10, 20 years if we are going to address the affordable housing crisis through greater density of housing that's not typical for Needham or any of the surrounding towns. Newton just had a big election where some of the more pro-development candidates were defeated, and you can go around Newton and see a lot of signs that say "Save our villages." This is going to be a big debate.
are those the same signs that were saving Ferris back in the day? Now they're saving the villages.
You are.
There was an article in the Globe about ADUs, and we had a very contentious debate about ADUs locally, right at the Springtown meeting, where we wanted
Say
there
what
was
an
a
ADU is.
proposal for detached ADUs, and boy, that got people really upset leading up to it. I know we're still studying it, but in the Globe today, they're talking about California, where they've made much more accessible for ADUs, and how much of a great impact that's had on people being able to get small affordable apartments where there's a real need, as well as for residents to make some additional income. And they said in that article, there is a chance, much like the MBTA Communities Act came from a governor, that the governor could and is thinking about mandating ADUs across the state, because it is the local zonings in towns like Needham and everywhere else where we have town meetings that are controlling their own zoning, and have been the reason there's been so little housing developed.
An ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit, and that's when you put like an in-law apartment in your basement or turn your garage into an apartment. Um, And so far, Needham has taken a few kind of tentative steps towards allowing it. And then we recently, town meeting broadened it to relax some of the restrictions of who could live in an ADU. They don't have to be quite so closely related to the people who own the property. But there have not been a lot of, I think the
No.
statistic at town meeting last year was that like 4 or 6 or something
Yeah.
had been developed.
It's
So it's very,
supposed to be
very low.
painful. Although I believe what we passed, as long as it's not detached, what we passed in the spring is supposed to make it a lot easier for you to do an ADU in your house as opposed to a freestanding one, which we rejected. Um, so if we're going back to the Linden and the thing that's before us,
Back
the
to the topic.
Yeah, the plan is no. I think they're all related. The plan is what we're going to be voting on at town meeting. We're going to be voting on funding, and we're going to be voting on zoning. The plan is right now, and if both of those pass, construction would start end of 2025. And for the Linden residents, some of them are going to need to be relocated in order to do this. It's going to be a phased construction where they're going to construct one side of the building and move a bunch of residents in it, and then work on the second part of the building. But there's the all residents that get relocated have a right to return. The housing authority will cover their relocation expenses, and they're going to be paired with a coordinator to help them in that. But that still will be disruptive. I don't know whether residents in Seabeds and Cook Bridge will any of those will need to be relocated. I didn't hear that. So
And so this construction, was likely in a few years if things pass. And then the idea is that for Chambers, right, sort of behind where the Linden apartment building is going, another one of these sort of large 4-story apartment buildings could go in. Now that's sort of a future plan. It's not in front of us. It hasn't been funded out and everything yet. But the idea is that if this one apartment building goes in and then we do the seabeds, then we're going to do some more construction in that same neighborhood.
yeah, starting with Chambers, and then also the other half of the High Rock houses that have
Oh,
not
right. Yep.
built,
Yeah.
is the plan over 10 years. But once again, this is the first step. Yeah, so the plan is with Chambers, which would be next right now, to add 31 units while rebuilding those buildings. And in the High Rock estates, you'll be taking single houses and building them into duplexes, which will double the number of units there. Um, there has been some kind of waves within the town on the financing of this, not actually the numbers, but more the tracking of the dollars. We initially funded 1.4 million in last spring in May of 2022. We funded 1.4 million sort of to do the studying to get ready to get the funding of what we're going to be voting on coming up in the spring. And they were coming back to the financial committee originally for the town meeting in this past spring. They were going to ask for more money. They were asking for another 1.2 million, but then it came out that none of the money had been spent yet. The contract had just been signed, and there was a lot of concern, where normally when Needham is building a building, they have a lot more control over it. And there are lots of groups involved. There's the Needham Housing Authority, which the town government doesn't have any sway over. There is the Cambridge Housing Authority, that's the development partner. There's the architect. There's there was raised a bunch of sort of red flags that we need more oversight for this. So there was a new committee started, another acronym, TCHOC, which sounds like T-Chalk's going to have his new rap album coming out in the spring. It stands for Town Financed Community Housing Oversight Committee, and it has a party from FinCom. It has a party from like our permanent public building, from Select Board, uh, to keep an eye on this, both to make sure it keeps moving on time, because they worry if it hits delays, it gets more expensive, and to make sure that the money's being spent in the right place, with so many different kind of bodies and hands in between, the town and the shovels actually going in the ground. So
And there's an upcoming meeting, right? Is that right?
yes, oh yeah, very important. I don't have the date in my notes right now. I have it in my calendar. It's coming up week after next. It is Wednesday, December 6th. There is a public hearing at the Broad Meadow Elementary School. I believe 7 p.m., but please double check that. I'm sure Aaron will get it in the show notes. But that's really important, right? I would say if you're a resident and you're in a butter, please go. If you're someone who wants to see more affordable housing in town, please go and speak your mind. And you know what? Even if you're someone you don't want affordable housing in town, please go. Like the town needs to hear from everybody, as many people as possible, because sometimes what happens on these, you might get the people that are most upset about it, where we really need to get a read on the overall town. And I know Aaron and I always talk about this, like Aaron and I might think we have a really good read on the town, but the reality is we all have our own little bubbles that we're in, and who really knows? I'm close to this. I think I'm probably 0.3 miles from this development. I am someone who will be mailed, as one of the abutters to come to some of these meetings. I fully support it, but I know not all will. So by
Yeah.
all
So
means,
just so
attend or even send an email or whatever if you can't attend. To make sure your voice is heard.
Yeah, so it's Wednesday, December 6th, 7 p.m. is the time, and it's going to be both at the Broadmeadow School in person, but also on Zoom.
So
I'm sure they'll also take comments. I expect they'll take comments on Zoom as well. So even if you can't be there in person, you could attend by Zoom and watch it, and probably even there'll be a recording on YouTube, probably. So
Yep.
there,
So,
there will
so after
definitely be
you have
ways.
spent your day having your soul sucked out on Zoom all day, you can jump on Zoom at night. Keep that ball rolling. Um,
Well, I think that totals it for the Needham Housing Authority's plan to increase our affordable housing stock here in Needham.
yeah, I'm gonna just one last kind of timing thing is that if we pass the zoning and funding at this May 2024 town meeting, unless there's any delays or other inflation or things gets in the way, we should have all of these new units available by 2027. So of this first thing that we're voting on. So this will take some time, but has a chance to have a big impact.
Definitely a big impact and a really important debate for all of our plans for improving the housing market in Needham. All right, for this episode of Needham Say More, I'm Aaron Pressman.
And I am Doug Fox. Thanks so much for spending time with us.